October 29th, 2018, 6:20 a.m. Jakarta, Indonesia. Lion Air Flight. 610 climbs into clear skies. 13 minutes later, all 189 people on board are dead. The plane is brand new. A Boeing 737 MAX 8, the most advanced aircraft Boeing has ever built. Or so they said. 5 months later, it happens again. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, another 737 MAX. Another 157 lives gone, 2 crashes, 346 people, same plane, same defect. But here's what makes this different from every other aviation disaster you've heard about. Boeing knew, their engineers knew, their test pilots knew, their executives knew, and they hid it anyway. This is the story of how America's most trusted airplane manufacturer conspired to defraud the government, deceived the pilots flying their planes, and turned a safety system into a death trap. This is the story of the 737 MAX. There's a pattern that repeats whenever engineering meets shareholder pressure. Stage 1, a competitor threatens your market dominance. Stage 2, you rush a response to market without proper testing. Stage 3, you discover a critical flaw, but the timeline is already set. Stage 4, you choose concealment over transparency. Stage 5, you manipulate regulators to avoid costly delays. Stage 6, the system fails. People die. Stage 7, the cover-up unravels. Most companies never make it past stage 3. They fix the problem, they delay the launch, they choose safety. Boeing went all the way to stage 7. And in July 2024, they pled guilty to criminal fraud conspiracy. The first time in Boeing's 108-year history they admitted to a felony. This is how it happened. But it didn't start with a crash. It started with a threat. December 2010, Boeing's headquarters in Chicago. For decades, Boeing owned the single-aisle aircraft market. The 737 was the workhorse of global aviation. Over 10,000 delivered, the most successful commercial jet in history. Then Airbus announced the A320neo. Neo stood for New Engine Option, more fuel efficient, 20% lower operating costs. Airlines loved it. And they started canceling Boeing orders. American Airlines, Boeing's oldest customer, was about to place a massive order with Airbus. Boeing had 2 choices. Design a completely new aircraft. That would take a decade and cost $15 billion. Or redesign the 737 with new engines. Fast, cheap, and keep it classified as the same aircraft type so pilots wouldn't need extensive retraining. They chose option 2. They called it the 737 MAX. The timeline? Impossibly tight. First delivery, 2017. But there was a problem. The new engines were too big. They didn't fit under the wings in the normal position, so Boeing moved them forward and up, and that changed everything. Let's understand what Boeing was really selling. Not just an airplane, a business model. See, when airlines buy aircraft, they're not just buying metal and engines, they're buying operating economics. The cost of training pilots, the cost of maintenance, the cost of fuel. Boeing's pitch was simple. The 737 MAX is just a 737. Same type rating. Your pilots already know how to fly it. What does that mean? In aviation, every aircraft has a type rating. It's a certification that says a pilot is qualified to fly that specific aircraft. Getting a new type rating takes weeks. Simulator time, ground school, it's expensive. Boeing promised airlines they wouldn't need that. A pilot certified on the old 737 could fly the MAX with just a few hours of iPad training. Think about what that meant in dollars. American Airlines had 9,000 pilots. Southwest had 10,000. If each pilot needed 3 weeks of MAX-specific training at $15,000 per pilot, for American alone, that's $135 million. Boeing was selling convenience wrapped in cost savings. But here's the engineering problem they created. The new engines, LEAP 1B engines made by CFM International, were bigger and more fuel efficient. But they were so large they couldn't fit in the standard position under the 737's low-slung wings. So Boeing's engineers moved them forward and mounted them higher. This created an aerodynamic issue. During certain flight conditions, high speed, steep climb, light weight, the engine position could cause the nose to pitch up. Too much pitch and the plane stalls. The wings lose lift, the aircraft falls. Boeing needed a fix. They created a software system called MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Here's what it did. If the plane's angle of attack got too steep, MCAS would automatically push the nose down. It would take control away from the pilot, without telling them, and force the nose down to prevent a stall. Now, let me be clear. Automated safety systems are common in aviation, but they have rules. Rule 1, pilots must know the system exists. Rule 2, pilots must be trained on how it works. Rule 3, pilots must be able to override it easily. Boeing broke all 3 rules. They didn't tell pilots MCAS existed. They didn't put it in the pilot manual. They didn't include it in training. Why? Because if they disclosed MCAS, airlines would ask questions. Questions lead to training requirements. Training requirements destroy the business model. Remember, the entire selling point was same plane, no new training needed. So Boeing classified MCAS as a minor software enhancement, not a new flight control system, just a background feature. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, was supposed to catch this. But here's where the system was already broken. In 2005, the FAA started a program called Organization Designation Authorization. Sounds bureaucratic. Here's what it really meant. The FAA let Boeing regulate itself. Boeing employees, paid by Boeing, were authorized to approve safety features on Boeing's behalf. The FAA trusted Boeing to police Boeing. Let's do the math on the incentive structure here. Boeing's goal: deliver the MAX fast, keep it cheap, beat Airbus. FAA employees at Boeing. Their job security depends on Boeing's success. Independent oversight? Virtually none. Question: what happens when the regulator works for the company it's regulating? So you get exactly what happened next. Boeing's engineers raised concerns about MCAS internally. Test pilots said it was too aggressive, that it needed limits, that it needed redundancy. But Boeing's leadership was under pressure. The MAX was already behind schedule. Airlines had orders in. Delivery slots were set. Changing MCAS meant delays. Delays meant penalty payments. Penalty payments meant bad earnings calls. So they made a choice. They told the FAA that MCAS was a limited system that only activated in rare conditions. They said it could only move the stabilizer 0.6 degrees. They said it relied on multiple sensors. All three statements were false. Court documents would later show that Boeing employees knew these statements were false when they made them. In the final design, MCAS could move the stabilizer 2.5 degrees, 4 times more than disclosed. It could activate repeatedly, pushing the nose down again and again, and it relied on a single sensor, one angle of attack sensor. If that sensor gave bad data, MCAS would respond to phantom information. It would fight the pilots for control, and the pilots wouldn't know why. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. This wasn't incompetence. This was concealment. Boeing had the data. They had the test results. They had the internal warnings, and they hid them from the FAA. Federal prosecutors would later call it fraud. But in 2017, none of that was public. The 737 MAX was certified. Orders were pouring in. Airlines were taking deliveries. Wall Street loved it. Boeing's stock hit record highs, and then people started dying. May 22, 2017, Malindo Air takes delivery of the first 737 MAX. Boeing's CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, calls it the newest member of the most successful jet family in history. Airlines around the world have ordered 4,700 MAX aircraft. At list price, that's $250 billion in future revenue. Boeing's stock is soaring. The company is on track for record profits. But inside Boeing, something else is happening. Pilots are reporting problems, not crashes, not yet, but warnings, uncommanded movements. The plane pitching down unexpectedly. May 2017. A Boeing test pilot experiences MTS activating during a simulator session. He describes it as catastrophic in an internal message. He writes, "I basically lied to the regulators." That message won't become public until after the crashes. November 2017. A Lion Air 737 MAX experiences an MCAS malfunction on a flight from Bali to Jakarta. The angle of attack sensor feeds bad data. MCAS pushes the nose down. Hard. The pilots fight the controls. The plane porpoises, nose down, nose up, nose down. An off-duty pilot in the cockpit jump seat recognizes the problem. He tells them to flip 2 switches on the center console, cut out switches that disable the stabilizer trim. The MCAS stops. The pilots regain control. They land safely. But here's what should terrify you. 3 pilots in the cockpit, and only the off-duty one knew what to do. The 2 flying the plane had no idea what was happening, because Boeing never told them MCAS existed. Lion Air reports the incident to Boeing. Boeing sends a technical team. Do they ground the fleet? Do they issue an emergency directive? Do they tell the FAA what's happening? No. They replace the faulty sensor and send the plane back into service. October 28, 2018. That same aircraft, registration PK-LQP, is scheduled for a morning flight. Lion Air Flight 610, Jakarta to Pangkal Pinang. 189 people on board. The captain is Bhavya Suneja, 31 years old, experienced, over 6,000 flight hours. The first officer is Harvino, 41 years old. Goes by one name, as is common in Indonesia. 6:20 a.m. The plane takes off. 2 minutes later, the captain's angle of attack sensor starts feeding false data. MCAS thinks the plane is pitching up dangerously. It's not. MCAS pushes the nose down. MCAS pushes again. They pull back. Again, and again, and again. Over and over, more than 20 times in 11 minutes. The pilots don't know what's happening. They're fighting a ghost. The cockpit voice recorder captures their confusion. They're flipping through checklists, calling out warnings. Stall, 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 the automated voice says. But the plane isn't stalling. The sensor is lying. MCAS doesn't know that. It only knows what the sensor tells it. 6:32 a.m. 11 minutes after takeoff. The pilots lose the fight. The plane hits the Java Sea at 450 miles per hour. There are no survivors. Think about that. Brand new airplane, experienced pilots, perfect weather, and everyone dies. Indonesia launches an investigation. Boeing sends a team. The preliminary report finds the angle of attack sensor failed. But it also finds something else. The pilots didn't know how to disable MCAS because they didn't know MCAS existed. Boeing issues a bulletin to airlines, not a grounding, not a fix, a bulletin. It says, in the event of uncommanded nose-down stabilizer trim, use the cutout switches. But it still doesn't explain what MCAS is or why it activates. Pilots around the world read this bulletin and ask, what is uncommanded nose-down trim? What causes it? Boeing doesn't answer. The FAA doesn't ground the MAX. Airlines keep flying it, and Boeing keeps delivering new ones. November 2018, 1 week after the Lion Air crash, Southwest Airlines Pilots Union sends Boeing a list of questions about MCAS. American Airlines pilots do the same. They want to know, why weren't we told about this system? Boeing's response is vague, technical. It minimizes the issue. They say MCAS is activated without pilot input, but insist it's not a safety issue if pilots follow procedures. But what procedures? The ones Boeing never trained them on? December 2018, Boeing's stock dips slightly after the Lion Air crash, but analysts say it's temporary. Orders keep coming in. The MAX is still the fastest-selling plane in Boeing's history. January 2019, Ethiopia receives its first 737 MAX. Ethiopian Airlines is one of Africa's most respected carriers. Excellent safety record. They're proud of the new aircraft. It represents modernization. March 10th, 2019, 8:38 a.m., Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, bound for Nairobi, Kenya. 157 people on board. The captain is Yared Getachew, 29 years old, 8,100 flight hours. First officer, Ahmed Noor Mohammed Noor, 25 years old. Both pilots had trained on the 737 MAX. Both had read Boeing's post-Lion Air bulletin, 8:38 a.m. takeoff. 1 minute later, the captain's angle of attack sensor fails. MCAS activates. But this time, the pilots know what to look for. They've studied the Lion Air crash. They flip the cutout switches. They disable MCAS. They do exactly what Boeing's bulletin told them to do. But there's a problem Boeing didn't explain. When you disable the electric trim, you have to trim the aircraft manually, by hand, using trim wheels in the cockpit. At high speed, with the stabilizer already in an extreme position, those wheels are almost impossible to move. The pilots try. The cockpit voice recorder captures them grunting with effort. They can't do it, so they make a decision. They re-enable the electric trim, just for a moment, to get the stabilizer back to a manageable position. MCAS reactivates instantly. It pushes the nose down. Full force. They've lost. 8:44 a.m., 6 minutes after takeoff. The plane hits the ground at 700 miles per hour. The impact is so violent that the wreckage crater is 30 feet deep. There are no survivors. Now the world pays attention. 346 people dead. 2 brand new planes, 5 months apart. Same failure mode. Within 48 hours, countries start grounding the 737 MAX. China grounds it. The EU grounds it. India, Australia, Singapore, everyone grounds it. The FAA waits. For 3 days, the United States keeps flying the MAX while the rest of the world won't touch it. Finally, on March 13th, the FAA issues an emergency order. The 737 MAX is grounded worldwide. All 387 aircraft in service, parked. But here's what the public doesn't know yet. This wasn't a tragic accident. This wasn't an engineering miscalculation. Federal investigators are already looking at internal Boeing messages, and what they're finding is evidence of fraud. Let's do the math on what Boeing knew. Fact 1, Boeing knew MCAS relied on a single sensor. No redundancy. Fact 2, Boeing knew MCAS had more authority than they told the FAA, 2.5 degrees versus 0.6 degrees. Fact 3. Boeing knew MCAS could activate repeatedly, not just once. Fact 4. Boeing's own test pilots called the system catastrophic in simulators. Fact 5. Boeing employees admitted in writing they lied to the regulators. Add it up. Knowledge plus concealment plus regulatory deception equals fraud. And the evidence was in Boeing's own files. Let's talk about how the machine actually worked, not the airplane, the system that allowed this to happen. Because this wasn't just about one software feature, it was about an entire culture. In the 1990s, Boeing was an engineering company. Engineers ran Boeing. They made the final calls. The company motto was, "Engineers know best." Then, in 1997, Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas. McDonnell Douglas was struggling. They'd lost contracts. Their culture was different. They believed in shareholder value above all else. After the merger, McDonnell Douglas executives took over Boeing's leadership. They moved headquarters from Seattle, where the planes were built, to Chicago. They wanted distance from the factory floor. They wanted to focus on finance. Boeing's new priority wasn't engineering excellence. It was stock price. Wall Street loved it. Boeing's stock tripled between 1997 and 2007. But something was lost. Engineers started reporting to finance people, not the other way around. When timelines slipped, they were told to think about earnings calls. One Boeing engineer later testified, every decision became a business case, not a safety case. Here's how it worked in practice. The 737 MAX program had a budget, a timeline, a profitability target. Any change that threatened those three things faced enormous pressure. When engineers said MCAS needed a second sensor for redundancy, that change cost money and time. When test pilots said MCAS needed better limits, that meant software revisions. Delays. When technical teams said pilots needed training, that destroyed the business model. At each decision point, the pressure went one direction. Keep moving. And there was a structural reason this pressure worked. Remember the FAA's delegation program? Boeing had 1,500 employees authorized to approve Boeing's own designs. The FAA had only 45 inspectors assigned to the MAX certification. Let's do that math. 1,500 Boeing employees approving Boeing's work. 45 independent FAA inspectors overseeing them. That's a 33-to-1 ratio. Question: how does oversight work when the company has 33 times more people doing the approving than the government has doing the checking? Answer: it doesn't. The FAA trusted Boeing's internal approvals, and Boeing's internal approvers were under pressure to keep the program on schedule. One FAA inspector later told investigators, "We had to rely on Boeing's data. We didn't have the resources to verify it independently." So when Boeing said MCAS was a minor feature, the FAA believed them. When Boeing said it only moved the stabilizer 0.6 degrees, the FAA wrote that in the certification. When Boeing said pilots didn't need training, the FAA agreed. Every false statement went into the official record. And nobody caught it, because the system was designed to trust, not verify. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Boeing knew the FAA was trusting them. Internal emails show Boeing employees joking about it. One employee texted, "I want to stress this. I want to be sure we have not left the FAA out to dry." Another replied, "Would you put your family on a MAX simulator-trained aircraft? I wouldn't." These messages were written in 2016, 2 years before the first crash. They knew. They knew the training was insufficient. They knew they were misleading regulators, and they shipped it anyway, because the alternative was delay. Delay meant penalty payments to airlines. Southwest alone had a contract clause. If Boeing missed delivery dates, Boeing paid millions in compensation. Delay meant Airbus gaining market share. Delay meant a bad quarter, a stock price hit. Angry shareholders. So they chose speed, and they chose concealment. Court documents filed by federal prosecutors describe it clearly. Boeing concealed information about MCAS from the FAA. Boeing employees deceived the FAA. This fraud prevented pilots from receiving necessary training. The fraud wasn't complex. It was simple. They said the system did one thing, it did another. They said it was minor, it was critical. They said pilots didn't need to know, pilots needed to know. And 346 people paid with their lives. April 2019, 1 month after the second crash. The U.S. Department of Justice opens a criminal investigation. Not a civil case, not a regulatory review, a criminal investigation. The FBI starts interviewing Boeing employees. They seize documents, they review emails, and what they find is devastating. Internal messages between Boeing's chief technical pilot, Mark Faulkner, and the FAA. In 2016, Faulkner tells the FAA that MCAS will only activate in specific flight conditions that don't normally occur in flight. That statement is false. MCAS can activate during normal operations. In another message to a colleague, Faulkner writes, "I basically lied to the regulators." When these messages become public in October 2019, the scandal explodes. Congress demands answers. Families demand accountability. Boeing's CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, testifies before Congress. He faces the families of crash victims. They hold photos of their dead children, spouses, parents. One father asks him directly, "Did you know about MCAS before the crashes?" Muilenburg says Boeing believed the aircraft was safe, but he doesn't answer the question. Senators grill him for hours. "Why didn't pilots know about MCAS?" they ask. "When did you know there was a problem?" they demand. "Who made the decision to withhold information?" they press. Muilenburg's answers are evasive, carefully worded, legalistic. Senator Richard Blumenthal says this is a case of criminal negligence at best. The hearing is brutal. The country watches. Boeing's reputation, built over a century, is collapsing in real time. November 2019. Internal Boeing documents leaked to the press, employees calling the MAX designed by clowns who, in turn, are supervised by monkeys. Employees saying they wouldn't put their families on the plane. Employees mocking the FAA for being so easy to manipulate. One message says, "This airplane is ridiculous. These aren't whistleblowers. These are the people who built it." December 2019. Boeing's board fires Muilenburg. No severance beyond what his contract requires. A public rebuke. His replacement, David Calhoun, promises a culture change, but the criminal investigation continues. Federal prosecutors are building a case. They have the emails, the test data, the internal warnings. They have evidence that Boeing knew MCAS was dangerous and hid it anyway. The question is, what will they charge? Who will they charge? January 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic hits, aviation collapses, airlines cancel orders, Boeing's stock craters. The MAX investigation continues, but the world's attention shifts. Behind the scenes, Boeing's lawyers are negotiating with prosecutors. They know what's coming. The evidence is overwhelming. The question isn't guilt. The question is the price. October 2020. Leaked documents show the FAA was preparing to allow the MCAS to fly again. After 20 months grounded, after software fixes, after new pilot training, families are furious. How can you recertify a plane built on fraud? But the FAA says the issues are fixed. MCAS now uses 2 sensors. It has limits. Pilots are trained. November 2020. The FAA officially recertifies the 737 MAX. Airlines start flying it again. Some passengers refuse to board. Others don't know. Airlines don't always announce which aircraft type you're flying. The MAX is back in the sky, but the criminal case isn't over. January 2021. Boeing reaches a settlement with the Department of Justice. $2.5 billion total, $243.6 million in criminal fines, $1.77 billion in compensation to airlines, $500 million for a fund for crash victims' families. But here's the critical part. Boeing doesn't plead guilty. They accept a deferred prosecution agreement. Translation, admit fault, pay money, change your practices, and we'll drop the charges in 3 years. No executives are charged, no one goes to jail. The company pays, the people who made the decisions walk free. Families call it a sweetheart deal. Federal judges call it outrageous, but it's done. Or so everyone thinks. This is where it becomes irreversible. January 5th, 2024, a Boeing 737 MAX 9 operated by Alaska Airlines is climbing through 16,000 feet. Suddenly, a door plug blows out. A refrigerator-sized hole opens in the fuselage. Passengers' phones are sucked out. Seats are damaged. The cabin depressurizes. The pilots make an emergency landing. Everyone survives. But the incident reopens everything. The FAA immediately grounds all 737 MAX 9 aircraft for inspection. Investigators find loose bolts, missing hardware. Quality control failures. This isn't software. This is basic manufacturing. And it raises a terrifying question. What else did Boeing cut corners on? The families of the Lion Air and Ethiopian crashes have been watching. They never accepted the 2021 settlement. They argued it was too lenient. Federal judges agreed. In March 2024, a federal judge voids the deferred prosecution agreement. He says the DOJ failed to consult with the victims' families as required by law. The deal is dead. The case is reopened. Prosecutors go back to Boeing with a new message. This time, you plead guilty. No deferred prosecution. No walking away. A felony conviction. Boeing tries to fight it. Their lawyers argue a conviction could jeopardize government contracts. Boeing is a major defense contractor. They build military aircraft, satellites, space systems. A felony conviction could make them ineligible for federal contracts worth tens of billions. But prosecutors don't blink. July 2024, Boeing pleads guilty to one count of conspiracy to defraud the United States, specifically conspiracy to defraud the FAA. The plea agreement includes $243.6 million in criminal fines, an independent corporate monitor for 3 years, $455 million in new safety investments, mandatory compliance, program overhauls. It's official. Boeing is a convicted felon. The first criminal conviction in the company's 108-year history. Think about what that means. A company that built the B-17 that won World War II. A company that built the 747 that revolutionized air travel. A company that put astronauts on the moon. Now, a convicted criminal. But here's what haunts the families. Still no executives charged. Still no one in handcuffs. Dennis Muilenburg, the CEO during the crashes, he walked away with $62 million. Mark Faulkner, the chief technical pilot who admitted lying to regulators, acquitted by a jury in 2022. The engineers who raised concerns and were ignored. Some still work at Boeing. The DOJ says corporate prosecutions are complex. Individual criminal intent is hard to prove, but to the families, it sounds like an excuse. 346 people are dead, says Michael Stumo, whose daughter Samya died on Ethiopian Flight 302. And not one person has gone to jail. He's right. Let's do the math on accountability. People killed, 346 company convicted, 1 executive's charged, 0 jail time served, 0. Now compare that to other corporate crimes. Enron executives, prison. Theranos founder, prison. Volkswagen executives in the emissions scandal, some went to prison, but Boeing's leadership, golden parachutes. What's the lesson here? If you defraud investors, you go to jail. If you defraud regulators and people die, you might pay a fine. As long as the people making the decisions aren't held accountable, what changes? Boeing pays $243.6 million. That sounds like a lot, but Boeing's 2023 revenue was $77.8 billion. That fine represents 0.3% of annual revenue. For context, if you make $50,000 a year, that's equivalent to a $150 fine for killing 346 people. Does that sound like justice? The families don't think so. They're still fighting. Civil lawsuits, wrongful death claims. Some have settled, others refuse. They want more than money. They want admissions. They want reform. They want people in prison. Nadia Milleron, whose daughter Samya died on ET 302, says, "I don't want another family to go through this." But will Boeing actually change? The company says yes. New leadership, new safety culture, new oversight. But the corporate monitor is only for 3 years. And Boeing's business pressures haven't changed. They're still competing with Airbus. They're still managing shareholder expectations. They're still balancing safety against cost. The incentive structure that created this disaster is still in place. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. The system worked exactly as designed. Not the airplane, the system. A company prioritizes profit. Regulators trust the company. Oversight fails. People die. The company pays a fine. Leaders escape accountability. And then we move on. Until it happens again. Because it will happen again. Maybe not at Boeing, maybe not in aviation, but somewhere, in some industry, executives will face the same choice. Disclose a problem and face consequences. Or hide it and hope it doesn't blow up. What do you think they'll choose? What did Boeing choose? This is the point of no return. Not for Boeing. For all of us. Because if we accept this outcome, a felony conviction with no individual accountability, we're saying corporate leadership is above the law. We're saying you can kill hundreds of people through fraud and walk away rich. We're saying the system is broken and we're fine with it. Are we? So what happened to everyone involved? Let's go person by person. Follow the money, follow the accountability, or the lack of it. Dennis Muilenburg, CEO during both crashes. Fired in December 2019. But his severance package, $62 million. Stock, pension, deferred compensation. He hasn't been charged with a crime. He hasn't testified under oath. He's retired. Wealthy. Free. David Calhoun. Replaced Muilenburg as CEO, promised a culture change, said safety would come first. But under his leadership, the door plug blew out in 2024. He announced his retirement in March 2024. He'll step down with full benefits. Mark Faulkner, chief technical pilot who admitted lying to regulators, indicted in 2021 on 6 counts of fraud. Went to trial in 2022. Jury acquitted him on all counts. His lawyers argued he was a scapegoat. That senior leadership made the real decisions. The jury agreed. He walked free. The engineers who raised concerns, some left Boeing, some stayed. One testified anonymously to Congress. I was told to stop asking questions about MCAS. Another said safety concerns were treated as schedule problems. None of them were punished for speaking up, but none were rewarded either. Boeing's leadership didn't change their practices because of whistleblowers. They changed because people died, and the world found out. The FAA officials who approved the MAX, some retired. Some transferred to other departments. No one was fired. No one faced criminal charges. The FAA itself conducted an internal review. They admitted failures. They said they'd restore independent oversight. They said they'd rebuild certification standards. But the same delegation system still exists. Boeing employees still approve Boeing designs. The FAA still lacks resources for full independent review. What about the families? Some settled their civil lawsuits. The terms are confidential. Others are still fighting. Paul Njorge lost his wife and 3 young children on Ethiopian Flight 302. He rejected Boeing's settlement offers. He wants public accountability. Money doesn't bring them back, he says. I want the truth. Michael Stumo, whose daughter Samya died on the same flight, helped push for the DOJ to reopen the case. When Boeing pled guilty in July 2024, he called it a step forward, but not justice. These families became activists. They lobbied Congress. They met with prosecutors. They refused to let the world forget. Without them, Boeing might have escaped with the 2021 deferred prosecution deal. Without them, there might be no guilty plea. Their grief became their power. The airlines, Southwest, American United, they all grounded the MAX for 20 months. They lost billions in revenue, canceled flights, angry passengers. Boeing compensated them. That $1.77 billion in the settlement, that went to airlines, not to families, to corporations. The airlines took the money and put the MAX back in service. Today, 737 MAX aircraft fly daily, thousands of flights, millions of passengers. Most people boarding don't even know what plane they're on. And Boeing, still building planes, still delivering MAX aircraft. Stock price recovered from its 2020 crash low. They're working on new models, competing with Airbus. The corporate monitor will file reports. Boeing will make changes. But the fundamental tension remains. Safety costs money. Speed makes money. Which one wins when they conflict? We've seen the answer. So what do we learn from this? 3 lessons, each one critical. Lesson 1, for the public and investors' trust, but verify. For decades, Boeing's reputation was unimpeachable. If it's Boeing, I'm going. That reputation became a shield. It stopped people from asking hard questions. When Boeing said the MAX was safe, people believed them. When Boeing said pilots didn't need training, airlines accepted it. Brand reputation isn't the same as current accountability. Question: what industries are you trusting right now based on past performance? What companies have such strong reputations that you don't verify their claims? Boeing taught us, legacy doesn't guarantee integrity. Past success doesn't prevent future fraud. The bigger the company, the more you should ask questions. Lesson 2, for regulators. Self-regulation is a myth. The FAA's delegation program was built on a simple idea. Aviation companies want safe planes, and that's true. But it's not the whole truth. They also want profitable planes, fast planes, cheap planes. When those goals conflict with safety, what happens? The FAA assumed companies would choose safety. Boeing proved otherwise. You cannot ask a company to regulate itself. The incentives don't align. The FAA had 45 inspectors overseeing 1,500 Boeing authorized approvers. That's not oversight, that's abdication. Real regulation requires resources, independence, authority, and the political will to say no to powerful corporations. Question: how many other industries regulate themselves? How many other agencies trust companies to police their own compliance? The answer should terrify you. Lesson 3, for the system. Corporate accountability is broken. 346 people died. Boeing pled guilty to fraud. And not one executive went to prison, not one person in handcuffs. Compare that to street crimes. Compare it to individual fraud. Steal a car? Prison? Embezzle from your employer? Prison? Defraud regulators and cause 346 deaths? Retirement with millions. Here's why this matters beyond Boeing. Corporations are run by people. People make decisions. If those people face no personal consequences for criminal decisions, why would behavior change? Boeing paid fines, but Boeing is a legal entity. It doesn't feel pain. The executives who made the decisions are fine, they're wealthy, they're free. That's the lesson other executives are learning right now. You can take risks with safety. If it works, you get bonuses. If it fails, the company pays the fine. Either way, you're protected. As long as that's true, this will happen again. Different industry, different product, different victims, but the same playbook: prioritize profit, conceal problems, capture regulators, escape accountability. The Boeing 737 MAX case isn't unique. It's a template. We've seen it in finance, in pharmaceuticals, in energy. Wherever corporate power outweighs regulatory authority, wherever profit motives override safety concerns, wherever individual executives can make criminal decisions without personal risk, the pattern repeats. And until we break that pattern, until we demand individual accountability for corporate crimes, it will keep happening. That's not pessimism, that's pattern recognition. Different story, same playbook. October 29th, 2018. Remember that date? Lion Air Flight 610 takes off from Jakarta. 13 minutes later, 189 people are gone. That flight didn't crash because of pilot error. It didn't crash because of a mechanical failure. It crashed because Boeing chose deception over disclosure. Because profit mattered more than people. Because the system that's supposed to protect us was designed to trust the powerful. 346 people lost their lives. Mothers, fathers, children, friends. Each one a full life. Dreams, plans, futures. Gone in minutes because of decisions made in boardrooms years earlier. Boeing pled guilty. They paid their fines. They promised to change. But the people who made those decisions are still free, still wealthy, still beyond reach. And that should tell you everything you need to know about who the system is really built to protect. This is the story of the 737 MAX. But it's really the story of what happens when we stop asking questions, when we trust brands more than we trust evidence, when we let the powerful regulate themselves. Don't forget these names: Lion Air 610, Ethiopian 302, 346 lives. Remember them.